Adit, and welcome again, Nagendra. I think Adit has pretty much covered everything, but really excited to have you here. And I think, we'll be able to, we'll be talking a lot about, your journey, what you have been doing, right? And what does the overall, what's happening in the market right now. So before we get to that, why don't you, share few lines about yourself? What are your, what's that driving force? What's your ikigai basically, right? And what you have been doing? What are you doing at IKEA right now?
Sure. Like I said, thank you so much for having me. I think it's a privilege to connect with you folks and your audiences and talking through what has been my journey. But I think more importantly, to understand how it kind of correlates with others who are in probably similar parts as well. So thank you so much for doing this. First off, I think like Aditya himself mentioned, I think, again, thank you, Aditya, for that glorious background. I couldn't have introduced myself better, I think. But I started off my career as a software engineer, yes. I did that exactly for 3 months. And then I realized I didn't want to code for a living. I still code as a hobby, but I don't code for a living. I think I very quickly realized that in the first 3 months of my career, and then moved on to Auckland and then Deutsche Bank before I kind of found my calling of sorts at Tesco's. I was there for about 12 years. I think what was brilliant about my stint at Tesco was not the 12 years that I was there, but the 7 different jobs I did while at Tesco. That's where I was introduced to product management. I think back in the day, we were really not called as product managers because it's coming through in India and in Bangalore. But I entered the product management field as a project or as a program manager, and then moved on to a product owner and then a product manager and then leading teams. A lot of my time was spent in the HR tech domain at Tesco's, looking at the different countries Tesco's operated in, and how we can solve the problems of the discipline in those countries, the product discipline, that is. Then I kind of got in a comfort zone, and we'll probably talk about this as well a little later. And I wanted to move out of my comfort zone. So I think that was one of the most difficult thing to do, and was a risky thing. And I joined for the next 6 years. I spent my time at 2 different startups, leading the product management teams there, setting up the teams. One was just about a Series A when I joined the organization, and the other had closed its just about closing its Series B. So took some calculated risks and some educated calls and joined these organizations. I think the experience I spent in those 6 years in 2 different startups that I worked with has been brilliant. It taught me more about the discipline than any MBA course could have. And I recently also did a MBA with UCLA. So I can say that in both theory and practice that the stint at the startups was extremely enriching, although taxing, but extremely enriching. IKEA came calling after that, and I've been here with IKEA for about little more than a year now. Like Aditya again introduced, leading the product engineering team across Sweden and India. So it's been a glorious journey. I think about 18 odd years now. Yeah, 18 years. And a lot of mistakes done through the course, but hopefully I learned from those mistakes. I'm still learning, and let's see what the next few years have in store.
Nice, great. I think you had a pretty, inspiring journey so far. So you mentioned, that you stayed at Tesco for almost 12 years, had 7 different jobs, and that's where you got introduced to product management. So what led to that transition, right? And that too, back then product management was like you also mentioned, right? Product management wasn't something which was that common, right? That is, there was no specific role such as product management.
Yeah.
So I also want to understand from you, like what led to the birth of this role called product management, and what led to, this role getting adopted globally across all startups, across all enterprises.
Yeah, I think historically speaking, product management as a title or as a role, if I remember this right, came up in one of the marketing companies. The chief job was of that role to understand how to promote a product. At the end of the day, we've got to sell what we create. And my definition of product is a little, I'd like to think a little different. I don't consider a specific tangible or intangible thing as product. It could also be a service. I mean, if you apply the lens of product to a service organization, you can, there are things to learn through that as well. And even from an aspect of people management, although I don't want to objectify people, but my people are my products. I've got a go-to-market plan for some of my people. I've got a backlog for some of my people. So a product can be anything. My children are probably products as well, although my wife would beg to differ. But I think the entire thinking, right, for me, product management is a mindset, which is why when Aditya mentioned earlier about me identifying myself more as a product person, doesn't mean I have a specific affinity to the title. I think what it means is I have a very specific affinity to the mindset, which is how do you figure out what are the problems that are worth solving, and how do you solve them iteratively so that you know what works best. There are multiple right ways to do something, multiple ways to do the right thing rather. It's about deciding which is the most efficient way, and the efficiency can come as cost efficiency, the efficiency can come as a marketing efficiency, whatever the definition of efficiency. But identifying which path works out best and understanding what works the fastest and then going ahead and doing it. So going back to what you said, I think product management as a role is a mindset role. I don't want to call the cliche thing of CEO of a product. All those things are, I think, I don't really agree with that specific phrase to begin with, because there's a lot of non-authority related to product management, and there is a lot of taking people along with you on the journey. A CEO need not do that. A CEO might just say, this is the way we've got to do it, which is their prerogative, but not for a product manager. A product manager should take people along with the journey, and there are multiple people to take along with the journey. And that's an interesting thing, and that's a challenging thing as well.
Yeah, quite an interesting insight, right? Like treating everything as a product, right? Be it a process, be it a service, be it people.
Yeah.
So, this made me thinking. We always talk about, even in engineering, when you hire an engineer or when you have a tech team, right? We always talk about having a product mindset.
Yep.
Irrespective, like irrespective of you are a product manager, you are an engineer or XYZ, whatever you're doing doesn't really matter. You should have that, product mindset, right? So what are your thoughts, and then there are categories of people, right? Set A who have that product mindset, set B who doesn't have that mindset.
Yeah.
And they don't even know, like for them, it's an alien word. They don't even know what do you really mean when you say product mindset, right? So how can you explain this in a very layman language, right? For someone who wants to have a product mindset, but is not there. And even for leaders, who want their team to have that product mindset, but they're not able to convey it in a way, which is easily understandable by their team.
Sure. There's a very difficult question to answer. And I say that because a lot of people have different perspectives about it. And there are scholarly articles about that as well. And a lot of them who have much more experience than I do have some comments about it as well. But what I can talk about is my perspectives and what I have learned and what I have kind of validated it myself. And it's something that I look for when I'm talking to people, when I'm interviewing people as well. For me, what is key is, I'm going to quote Simon Sinek now, I guess, to start with why. I think that those three words summarizes the overall product mindset for me. And again, I don't want to call it the product mindset. It's not to mean that this is the mindset only product managers or product owners should have. It is a mindset that anybody who's building a product should have. And that goes with anyone who's kind of connected to product building. Of course, be the engineers or the product owners, the product managers, be it the designers, be it the marketing folks, be it even the CEO, doesn't matter who. So the mindset really is about figuring out the purpose behind something, Why are we doing something, and why do we need to do it in a particular way? I think myopic focus, in some cases, myopic focus really helps. A myopic focus on the why to begin with is, to me, the product mindset. And when you start focusing on the why, everything else becomes as an extension. And what I mean by that is, I mean, again, there are, like I said, there are multiple ways to do the right thing. But how do you focus on what do you want to solve for first? And that goes back to what is the final outcome we'd like to achieve, and that can be anything. Again, it could be somebody who's looking for an exit, then the why is different, or it could be somebody who's looking to clean up the oceans, and that's a different why altogether. So it starts with why, and everything else just falls in place once you've got that clarity. So for me, to summarize, when I talk about product mindset and when I hear product mindset, for me, it's about how much of a focus and how clear are people on the why, and how to ensure that they understand that before actually jumping to solutions. We humans are wired to jump at solutions, and we are wired to be proud about our solutions. I think this
have that bias.
Yes, and getting a bit disconnected to solutions and focusing on the problem is extremely difficult because it's more of a thankless job. I mean, like, how many people are proud of, okay, I solved it this way, and they're very proud of it, but someone else comes and says, okay, I figured out this is what we need to solve for, and be extremely proud of that, right? Very difficult. It's a very thankless thing to be honest.
Correct,
but
correct.
that to me is crucial before you solve things.
Makes a lot of sense. That's right. That's right. And coming from this, right? So so I think it's primarily around, like when you are doing something, getting involved in a very mechanical or transactional way versus getting emotional. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but getting curious about what you are doing and why you are doing it. I think that's what differentiates, right? In a way.
Agree. Totally agree. Getting
Yeah.
curious, staying curious, and inspiring curiosity, I suppose, is key in product management. And yeah, totally agree.
So I was recently talking to someone. So he was a CTO at one of the a huge banks in India, right? So we just came around, talking about this topic, and he told me, like one of his engineers came to me and came to him and told him, that man, you always keep talking about, like you should push your team to have a product mindset. But one of my teammate, came to me saying, like, why do I need to have it? If I have a print, if I have a clear PRD, if I have a clear set of user stories in place, what will be the difference if I just go ahead and build it from what I have in place, if I have it properly, right? Versus I start going for the why, or if I start getting curious for it. It's not that, like if I ask questions or if I get curious, nobody is anyway going to listen to me. This is something that has already been finalized, right? This is something that I have to anyway do it. Then why should I, invest my energy into something which is not going to matter?
Sure. And that's, I think, totally fine as well. I say that fully appreciating how this will land. It again goes back to the purpose, right? If the purpose of that individual is to remain operational and remain transactional without being prejudiced about it, it's totally fine. Because there's a lot to talk and say about the environment which kind of ensures the right products to grow and the right product mindset to grow. It's not that one person can come in and change the entire thing. Maybe they can, but it's going to be a uphill task. But it's about how does the environment, is the environment conducive for innovation? Is the environment conducive for product mindset? I think it comes down to that. It's totally fine if the strategy is to remain tactical. It's totally fine. But I think true innovation happens when your tactics move towards a strategy. I don't mean to confuse folks here with those words, but it's about really looking at what is it that you intend to achieve and working backwards from there. Because what you need to do today to achieve something 5 years later doesn't need to churn the entire ocean. It can be one small increment. but that one small increment is probably extremely key for the 10th increment you would have 2 years down the line. But it's about how do you play the long game, and how do you ensure that you've got your tactics to achieve your strategy and not the other way around.
So I think, the idea is to not get obsessed about picking up something and getting obsessed about it, but to also ask why, like even for that, why do you want to do that versus what will happen if you don't do that? And then taking, more aware decision, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's harder. What you mentioned, right? The last thing, it piqued my interest. It's harder to decide what not to do than what to do. And I've always, those two go hand in hand. It's not just about scoping what your priorities are. It's also about de-scoping what your priorities are not.
Yep.
And making that clear and making that aligned to the entire organization. And that brings focus like nothing else.
Right. What are your 2 cents, coming from, de-narrowing and or decluttering the overall scope, right? Coming from this, again, when I talk to there, a lot of founders, when they think of building something, even they have raised good money, decent money, but they are always overwhelmed and they want to, shove in all the features they can think of in their product, in their app, right? So what are your 2 cents for this? Like if someone is getting started with something, is there any framework? Is there any approach that you'd suggest for them to, keep themselves calm and start with something small rather than spending too much time on building everything, not getting a PMF and then, failing miserably, right?
Sure. So, again, it is, I go back to the environment, right? The environment in which the startup founders operate in. Maybe they're under pressure by the board. Maybe they're under pressure by the investors to churn features and become a feature factory. Because the investors, obviously, they're in the game predominantly. I don't want to keep it as a cookie cutter approach, but they're in the game to make money, of course, which is why they call it investors.
Right.
One way to get money is the volumes of features that you deploy. But it works in some cases. Take Excel, for example. It's probably got 100,000 features in that, which a typical person would probably use only 10% of it. But so many users of it that 10% probably covers 100% over the entire gamut of the people who are using Excel. But the key thing for me is the framework you asked for. So I think one of the things that I learned very early on is the lean canvas. It's a one-pager document, which is extremely in your face. It talks about what the problem statement is and who the customer is for the problem statement. I think this pairing, you also spoke about PMS, one of the hardest things to get, I suppose, starts with the problem customer pairing. If you get that wrong, then you'll never find a product market fit. Product and market is nothing but the problem and the customer pairing. So being very specific about what problem you're solving and for whom you're solving this problem, and then it goes beyond it. I definitely recommend the viewers to have a look at Lean Canvas. There's also a website which lets you build a canvas on your own. A lot of very quick training material as well. That to me has helped a lot for 2 reasons. One, it forces you to be extremely brief, and it forces you to have everything on one page. Having that clarity, and it's an A4 page, not an A0 page. So you need to make sure of that. And having that clarity and reading that again and again and again probably helps. It helped me for sure. Probably helps achieve PMF and also ensure that you're after the right problem, or you at least know when a problem is not right.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, so I was just recently talking to someone, and this guy wanted to build something like Cricinfo. You know Cricinfo, right?
Yes.
For cricket, right? So he wanted to build something similar, but for Olympic Games. They have around 25 to 30 games.
Interesting.
And since Olympic is getting picked up now, right? So the overall interest is much higher than what it was, like couple of years back after India brought in, like few gold medals and stuff, right? So he wanted to build something similar for that, but with a lot more features. So I tried kind of convincing him, that let's not do that. If you're doing that, you're probably going to uh, focus too much on bringing too many features. Plus, how will you drive adoption for all those features?
Yes.
You can't really, like drive all your marketing campaigns. You can't really, like push all your customers to use everything, and can't be building a feature just 1 or 2% of your users. But it gets very difficult for people. People typically don't want to understand, because what happens, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you are so much in love with what you are thinking, right? So it seems in a way you are actually in a bubble, And I think the most difficult part as an entrepreneur is to be unbiased with what you are thinking or what you are building,
Yeah.
right? Not loving your product too much, but looking at it as an end user. So
Yes.
that is something, how can, we as an entrepreneur, you know, stop ourselves from getting so much emotionally attached with what you are doing, what we
Hmm.
are doing.
Yeah. I've experienced some of this with the startup founders that I've at least consulted.
Imagine.
Yeah, and my constant advice is, uh, it might sound a bit oxymoronic, but try and lose control. Be comfortable losing control. When I say
Hmm.
that, not of course, it doesn't mean lose entire control of what it is, but start focusing on building your team who can, one, bring the fresh perspective, and two,
Hmm.
challenge you. I think breeding that
Right.
environment where anybody can challenge anyone is extremely crucial. I was extremely fortunate to be throughout, at least in my career, both work in environments as well as my bosses who are extremely happy and invite challenges from their peers and everybody else around them. I think building that safety net, so as to speak, where your team members, I mean, especially if you're a startup, if you're in a startup, people have joined you for a couple of reasons, more than a couple of reasons, but it's either to make a quick buck. Of course, it's extremely taxing on a lot of people, but there's obviously that incentive that if you make it big, you get something to boot. But I think more importantly, it's the passion. You need to be really passionate about something, right? Which is why you join the organization. And
Yep.
then you take these set of passionate people, and then if you put them in an environment where you just tell them, go do this, go do this, go do this, that's just extremely almost it's blasphemous. So you would have to create that environment where people can challenge you, and you'll start taking a backseat. We had interesting. I was just talking to my boss over the weekend on something as to how do we conduct these usability tests. Uh, we get our 8-year-old kids into the room and we ask them, look at this wireframe. What do you think about it? And they ground us. I think, and we just obviously having a jovial conversation about it, but that really works. Surrounding yourselves with people who don't know the discipline and then start punching holes is extremely good. But that also means the entrepreneur, the founder, they should be open to constructive or critical feedback, which is a key trait for them to do anything. If if they are in love with the solution, then they will build what they want to be built. But if they are in love with
The
the
problem.
problem, then
Yeah.
they will build what is needed to be built.
Correct.
It's a
Correct.
massive difference between those two.
Right. And then I think that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Like obsessed with the problem or you're obsessed with the solution.
Yeah, exactly. Take Gen AI and for example, 3 years earlier, the way we would have solved for, let's say, interaction with a bot is extremely different to how we solve for it today. The problem remains the same. How do you provide a more in my world? How do I provide a more engaging experience for candidates to learn about an organization? The way I solve for it today, very different. How I solved for it like 3-4 years ago, but the problem remains the same. The solution has changed. And basing, I mean, if you are in love with solutions, and you create problems for those solutions. So
Right.
I think that is also a dangerous mindset. But yeah, I think having an environment where people can challenge you, and having an environment where the solutions are not technology driven, is, in what I've learned to be at least a good way to ensure you're after the right thing.
Mm.
And that
Right.
kind of curbs the bias as well to a degree.
Right. I think it's a very, very strong statement, and plus yet, it makes so much sense, like love the problem, not the solution.
Yeah.
As keep going in, everywhere without looking for a North Star. So, Nagin, you have worked both at startups, right? You mentioned that you had a very small stint at one of the startups. Now you're working for IKEA, right? Now, how do you see, in terms of approach, in terms of strategy, when you are approaching a problem, how different it is, in a startup versus an enterprise like IKEA?
Yeah. Uh, a massive difference. So large enterprises, there is an appetite for risk, or there's an appetite to go wrong. But in startups, if you go wrong, in some cases, it could cost the entire organization. So, but the flip side as well is in startups, you're extremely nimble. And unless you are fixated on a particular problem, or unless you're fixated on a particular thing to solve for, you can iterate very quickly.
Right.
Most of them, when they started off an organization, and most of the successful companies and where they are today, they have pivoted and they've persevered. They persevered things that worked for them, and they pivoted things that hasn't worked for them. And in large organizations and large enterprises, they've kind of found the PMF, so much so that they have to protect it.
Correct.
So the propensity to take risks is, I believe, and I have experienced it to be much lower. But on the other hand, there is obviously, I mean, everybody is financially fit now. But on the other hand, there's also the massive comfort zone that you get to take risks and to learn from mistakes. I think that to me is extremely advantageous from an enterprise standpoint. Startups, in some cases, cannot afford that risk.
And do you think that, startups versus enterprises, there are two different breed of people, different breed of folks, be it product engineering, anything, which is required in a startup versus an enterprise?
Yeah, it is. In startups, the only thing, I'm talking in binary now, and let it be in the binary. In startups, the only thing that matters is how much money you're raising. When I say raising, not from investors, but from customers. And in enterprises, how much is this in alignment to the overall organizational strategy? In startups, you can build a strategy, you can build your goals and change that in a quarter or in 6 months. But in large enterprises, you've got to stay the course for years. In some cases, 5 years, 3 years is not uncommon for large enterprises to do that. One of the analogies that is consistently used, right, is large enterprises are massive beings. I mean, call them dinosaurs or a massive ship. It is extremely stable. It'll weather the toughest of storms. But to make a steering course correction is not so easy. It is slow. And because it's carrying the entire weight of that organization along with it. So it's not easy to make those steering corrections. And for that reason, it's more important that you go after the right strategy, go after the right goals, and set that goal for like a 3-year period before you go ahead and do it. Startups cannot afford to do that. You can't say, I will stick and do this only for the next 3 years. I mean, who knows if 3 years later if that's the way you want to solve for it as well. Just doesn't work that way. Startups need to be much more nimble. I think you've got to take course corrections every quarter. When I say course correction, doesn't necessarily mean you need to correct your course. It also means that you have enough validation to say, let's stay the course.
Just monitoring, moving in the right direction, right?
Exactly.
Right. So primarily what I was saying is, like startups are more short-term focused versus enterprises that are very long-term focused.
True, but the way you said it could have a negative connotation to it. It is not that being short-term focused is necessarily a bad thing. It is that you need to monitor in the short term. Continuously monitor in the short term and take existential calls in the short term. In large organizations, you should monitor in the short term, but your existential calls will not be taken looking at how the last 3 months went, or the last 6 months went, not even how the last probably 1 year went. The existential calls will be taken as to how you're performing. If the last year was a slump, it's fine. We can weather it. Startups cannot. So it is true. I think it's more of monitoring extensively in the short term and taking existential calls in the short term for the startups, and long term calls for the large enterprises.
So an interesting question came to me. So basically, if you look at startups or versus anywhere, there are a lot of metrics that you measure on a day-to-day basis, right? To see how things are going, like if things are moving in the right direction or not, if we are aligned with our North Star or not, right? So for a startup, like let's say I am someone who has just built a product, right? I've just I've just started my GTM, right? And I'm just trying to drive more and more adoption. So is there any, like how should you go about defining those metrics? Is there any one metric that you should look at? Is there should be a set of metrics, or is there any standard set of metrics, which remains true for all kind of startups, or does it vary? Depends.
It definitely varies because the metrics differ from the kind of business you're trying to do. If it's a B2C startup, it's very different to a B2B startup. So the metrics definitely vary. And I'm not a big fan of a North Star metric. It's good in its way, it's got its advantages so that everybody knows the one single thing that you're going after, but it's seldom the one single thing. What I've learned is there are typically two types of metrics. One is extremely glacial, which is massive and slow moving, and the others are more nimble. And you have to keep the vanity metrics away from this. You don't want to see the metrics that makes you feel good. You actually have to see the metrics that
has an impact.
And you want these metrics to scream at your face and tell, do these changes, because those metrics are the one that will save your organization. So two different types of metrics. One is, like I said, glacial metrics, probably the North Star, which are extremely slow moving. When I say slow moving, it takes you a lot of time and it needs a lot of history to see if there is a movement in that metric. And the others are what you can track on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, and sometimes even an hourly basis, as to are these metrics pointing towards a direction which my North Star metric will point at a particular rate. A North Star metric just needs to take some more time to get it. Of course, the North Star metric will kind of ease out the ups and downs of the different environments that we'll have, and how that changes the metrics. And the smaller, the quicker metrics will obviously make sure you are in the right direction. So yeah, you need to have both, and you need to focus on both. While your North Star metric can be that one single metric is just plastered on the wall and how you are progressing, you need to have the other metrics in the background as well and continuously monitor it.
Right.
And there is no single metric that, it's not like the ring of power. There's no one ring that rules them all, and there's no one metric that rules them all. You need to consistently look if the metric is giving you the answer that you need. It's like, how can you kind of assimilate everything you're doing in the organization into one number? It's possible, yes, but extremely hard to get by. In the beginning, you shouldn't even try. Go with the 3. I believe in the magic number of 3 or 5, not more than that, not less than that.
But in the beginning, right? You are measuring so many things that you are confused. What to look at, what to look at.
Exactly. Yeah. There is a phrase called death by paralysis for a reason.
There is a power.
And yeah, you just lost your power.
Just give me a second. I think it
should
come.
Sure.
So you guys are working remotely now again? Yeah, just for today you're working from home.
No, we've got a 2-day work from office kind of mode. So the Tuesdays and Thursdays, our teams decided we'd work from office, and the other days we're at home.
So you have your entire product team based out of India, or you keep shuttling between India and Sweden?
I shuttle between India and Sweden. In fact, I'm going to Sweden in a couple of weeks' time. My entire team is in Sweden. So I'm the product engineering team. I have a product manager counterpart in India, but his entire team is in Sweden. So there's a lot of shuttling.
But you are based out of India, right?
I'm based out of Bangalore, yes.
You are based out of Bangalore. Got it. Got
Made
it.
the call to come back to Bangalore in 2016. It was just early life was extremely nomadic for both me and my wife. And
Yeah.
I think kids change you. And once we had our first daughter, and when she was about to start school, we thought we should at least settle down at one place.
So IKEA have their tech team based out of Bangalore, or is there other functions as well here?
Other functions as well. But we've got about 12 different hubs, and each hub owns their own thing. It doesn't mean the entire IT function is here. We've got offices in Amsterdam where the architects sit. We've got offices in Helsingborg in Sweden where all the entirety of my team sits there. So it's a completely distributed organization.
Got it. Nice, interesting.
Yep.
And I think
The
we'll
lights
just,
back.
yeah, slide us back. So let's continue with that. So I had one more, like question around this, right? So when, like a lot of people also have this question that, they have read it somewhere or somebody has suggested them this, that when you're building something, go and talk to your customer, do a lot of surveys, right? But what I typically observe, like the way they end up doing it is very flawed in nature, like you end up talking to a very small subset. The kind of questions you ask is, like you prepare those questions with a mindset that, like you'll get a favorable answer to that.
Yeah.
And again, the subset is very small, right? So what are your suggestions, like when you are doing it at scale, right? Even let's say at IKEA, right? If you're building something, so how do you do that user surveys or even the usability testing, right? You just
Yeah.
talked about this, right? So you have this entire prototype built in. How will you go about and do the usability testing?
IKEA does it beautifully. I mean, it leaves me extremely inspired the way IKEA solves this. We've got something called as Life at Home. We also recently released the report for Life at Home. So what and how IKEA does this, I've been here just for about a year, so I don't know the entirety of it, is people literally go and live in people's houses and homes. And they look
Oh,
at how they interact. And this is, we're not talking about hundreds, this is thousands, if not millions.
wow.
And they just look at how people live at home. And based on that, we take some product decisions. But listening to a customer is important. But again, going back to the famous Harrison Ford example, right? If you continuously ask the customer what they wanted, it is said a faster horse cart, not an automobile. It takes a visionary to listen to a customer but go against their immediate wants. Of course, Steve Jobs is a well-quoted example. And there are obviously a massive team behind Steve Jobs before the iPhone came to the picture. There's also urban myth that Steve didn't want the iPhone in the format it came. And there's a lot of articles on the internet about that as well. I'll let people decide what is right and what isn't. But I think from a customer perspective, listening to customers, yes, confirmation bias can be extremely dangerous. How I've at least done this is I've used it as, but it can also be extremely powerful. Confirmation bias when you are trying to confirm where you could go wrong. So for me, it's about confirming that are these the loopholes. Doing it in this particular way is something that will frustrate you because it's easier for people to tell what will not work for them than tell what will work for them. Because again, like I said, there are multiple ways to do the right thing.
Correct.
Don't have Olas and Ubers existing. They're solving the same problem. How they solve it is probably very similar as well, but there are two different ways to do the right thing. And there are multiple ways to do that. So for me, some of my questioning has been what frustrates them, because frustrations are kind of common, and some of the frustrations are also universal when you look at a particular customer's profile. And it can also be sliced and diced by the demography and the geographies of it. So understanding and validating how things will definitely not work is probably a good way to validate some of the things, but you always kind of have to step back and analyze, and you've got to take the decision. It's I think there is articles and facts about even large enterprises such as SAP and Oracle and how they find it difficult to even get access to customers, let alone listen to these customers, right? It's known to be, it's even in large enterprises is known to be a big problem. How do you work in spite of that? Because you still have to talk to your customers. Nobody wants to answer surveys. Even if you throw a $500 or $100 Amazon voucher at it, some of them might, but nobody really wants to take any surveys. But how do you listen to your customer and finding those entry points, and how do you infer your customer behavior through your product analytics is crucial.
Correct. So basically you suggest, like talking to them directly face to face or over a call, rather than sending them a form or a survey form or something.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you have to do multiple things. It's not like only one. Doesn't mean you should not send surveys. You should send surveys. But again, it depends on the type of customer again. So with large enterprises in a B2B sector, inviting customers to be a part of customer advisory board or an innovation advisory board is a great way to bring like-minded people together who are the decision makers, and then hear a variety of thoughts. If you put in like 10, let's say, directors of an organization in the problem statement that you're trying to solve for, put them in a room, they get to learn from that space as well. I mean, they get to learn from the other 9 folks in the room, and you get to learn a lot just by listening to their interactions. That obviously is in the B2B sector which is my forte. B2C way, I think the best sort of analytics is what your product can capture. Of course, there's a thin line between what you can capture through consent and only looking at that. Ethics is a big part, of course, but a lot of analytics, a lot of decision need to be inferred. You need to infer a lot of behavior, and you'll go wrong. You'll obviously go wrong, but I believe that's the best way, instead of just picking and talking to. How many people will you talk to in a B2C? There are millions and millions. And even if you talk to 1% of it, the number is so huge, it's very difficult to manage. And yet you would have just spoken to 1%. So how can you take how can you take decisions based on that? So it's a tough nut to crack, which is why Agile says fail fast. You learn something. Product management is all about hypothesis. You have a hypothesis, you don't have a solution. You think that this will work, it's still a theory. If it works, good, but you still need to track. You need to track it often so that it continues to work.
Correct. Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. I think I'll have my one last question for you.
Sure.
Right. So, there are a lot of folks. This is primarily for the 10x community that we have. So this community has a lot of engineers, mid-level engineers, senior engineers, and a lot of them wants to transition into a product role. And for them, most of them, the motivation primarily, they're going in for the wrong reasons. The motivation is like, I want to be at a place where I decide what has to be built versus just doing the execution part, right? So number one, so how do you think they should really approach it if they really want to get into it? How should they go about it? And if somebody really wants to transition from tech to product, what should be the steps? How should they go about it?
Yeah. So I think I'll quote myself as an example. I transitioned from a project manager role to a product manager role, and then from a product manager role to an engineering role. It isn't, and I'm not a unique case. I don't have special abilities, so as to speak. I can be considered as an average person, and my journey can be considered as what an average person would go through. No, honestly, because I'm not a typical case. I'm a typical case, which is why what that means is I won't say it's easy, but you got to plan ahead. And like I said, you've got to consider yourselves as a product. I did that. I consider myself as a product, and I had goals for myself, and I had a backlog for myself. I had a tech debt for myself. It sounds ridiculous, honestly, but I think once you do that, your movements start making sense. Now, you were absolutely right when you said the intent with which someone goes to a product manager role is extremely important, and the place where they go as well. Engineering team typically decide on the how. So if you as a product manager want to decide how to do something, and you're not doing justice for the role.
Correct.
If you're extremely proud, and if you're extremely, if you're passionate about solving things and remain in tech, it's a beautiful place to be. The worst call that somebody can make is moving career paths. Like engineering to product is a different discipline and different career path. Moving career paths and only knowing that this doesn't get them up on a Monday morning to get into work and do things. And you start creating a very toxic environment where when product managers start telling how things need to be done, they're not the best judges of it. Engineering team is the best judge because they are almost always in tune with the different technological trends. A product manager need not. They could be, but they need not be. So if the intent is to look at how you can fail, and how you can take responsibility and accountability of failures, and that's a product manager. The success, and I think this again I've learned through my career, when a product succeeds, it's seldom the sole responsibility of a product manager. A lot of people got together to make a product to succeed. But when a product fails, usually it's the product manager who is the reason. I'm not saying from a negative connotation. Is the reason because a product manager decides what to prioritize and what to build and why we need to do certain things. And that trumps how you do it. The how can very quickly change. You can pivot on the how very quickly. If you know something's not working, then it's easier to solve something differently than solve a completely different thing. Right? So if you're moving from whatever discipline, it can be a tech discipline, it can be I've known really good product managers who were real estate agents, so as to speak. I've known extremely good product managers who are Japanese school teachers. I mean, there's this person teaching English in Japan, and an English teacher, one of the best product managers I've worked with. So you don't need an MBA to be a product manager. You don't need to be a techie to be a product manager. Of course, some organizations prefer techies. I mean, famous example is Google, because that's the way they run the organization.
Right,
that's the right way for them.
Tech product manager, right? Those are not functional product managers. So I think
exactly
important for them. Yeah.
Exactly. So understanding tech is important so that you have a good conversation with the engineering team, but you don't need to know everything. But going back to what they should probably focus on, first they need to decide for themselves. Product management is an extremely, I love it. When I say the entire discipline of building products, and it spans multiple departments. It spans data science, it spans product, it spans tech, it spans UX, it spans multiple departments. So, and that gives me the kicks, and that keeps me going. So as long as you know what you want to do, it doesn't matter where you are contributing to building products. But if you want to be a product manager, you need to know that it is both interesting and challenging, because you are the person who need to have, you don't need to have all the answers, but you are the person who need to ask all the questions. Nobody else will ask the questions for you. You're the one who should ask the questions. So you need to be comfortable asking questions. You need to be comfortable saying no to anybody. It can be a board of director, it can be the CEO, it can be an engineering team, or it can be a customer. Because you know better. When I say you know better, it's only because a product manager has access to multiple information. And because of that, they are in a position where they know better, not because of the individual. The only advice I'd give is you need to stay committed, but it's obviously doable. A lot of them have done it. And there are multiple books you can read through to kind of inculcate the product mindset. I'm not a big fan of training courses. It obviously helps, but there are multiple books that you can read through and go through it. Yep.
Right.
I'm not sure if that completely answered the question. If there is a second part of the question, I'll be more than happy to give another answer.
No, I think that's pretty much, that's what I was asking, right? So if somebody wants to transition from tech to product, right? So how should they go about it? So I think you pretty much covered that.
Yeah, I think the easiest move is to look internally.
Yeah,
That's the easiest move, and get that experience, and then if you have to look out, then look out. But the easiest move is to move internally. But what's probably easier than that is, even before you move internally, you just shadow that person. Start taking a small project and start working on a small project, and then try to do it on your own. Or you can just go to the multiple communities out there. I think creators of product is one of the communities I like, where you can go there. It's a Slack community, and there are like-minded people, and use your spare time to build something. It can be anything. Use your spare time to build something, and then you at least learn about it a bit more.
Right. Makes sense. I have one last, that just came to my mind. If you have some more time.
Yes.
So, like what happens, what I've also observed a lot of times, when you're building something, sometimes you also get too obsessed with all the data and statistics that you have in place, and you end up not following your gut feeling at all, right? So how do you suggest, there have been instances, right? We have examples where people have completely, gone away with whatever the stats or whatever the data said, and gone with just their gut feeling, and it worked out really well.
Yep.
So how do you suggest, to have a balance between these two as well? Because sometimes as a product manager as well, even the PMs, they start questioning themselves as well. They might be right, but they start questioning themselves as well, based on certain data points. How do you think, like what's the right way to have a balance between both?
Yeah, I think it's the same analogy as Schrodinger's cat. You don't know for sure until you open the box, right? So I think there isn't an answer to it. The only answer is track, monitor. That's the only way. Gut feeling, I listen to my gut more than anything, I suppose, because again, I have a different sense of intuition, I suppose, and that's through my experience. I'm not saying everybody should start doing that. Do what works best for you, but track. What's a famous phrase? In God we trust, but in data we track. There's something like that, right? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But it is that. It is take the call. You have access to mountains and mountains of data, and it should not come at the expense of not progressing. You need to take a decision and progress.
Correct.
So the worst thing that you can do is just keep analyzing, and be afraid to progress. Even if it's the wrong call, it's fine. Just go ahead. If you know it's the wrong call, then think about, is there a different way to do it? Take the path of probably least friction, or depending again on risk propensity and everything else, right? But the key thing is listen to your gut, look at the data, do what your customer is telling, do what your board is telling, or do what your CEO is telling. Doesn't matter. Track. If you believe that this is one way to do it, and then start tracking. See what is the easiest way to do it, what is the quickest way to do it, and what's the most efficient way to do something, and then track it. See if it's working. If it's working, persevere. If it isn't, pivot.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I think that's all, Nagendra. Thank you so much for taking this call on a Monday morning. I know you must be swamped with work today. Must be waiting for this call to end and like carry on with your day. So thank you so much again. And I think it was really fun. It was very inspiring for me personally. So I'm sure people are going to love it.
Thanks again, Sukant. Thanks so much for having me, and it's always a privilege.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much again, Nagendra. We'll keep in touch.
Sure.
And we'll probably catch up whenever I'm in Bangalore. Whenever you're traveling to Delhi NCR, just let me know. We'll probably catch up.
Sure. All right. Take care now. Have a good one. Thanks. Bye.